So I was having coffee last week with an old friend. He works in design for one of those, huge tech companies you just can't ignore.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was telling me about this project he was really proud of, a new subscription pop-up. But he wasn't excited about the actual product itself.
Okay. What was he excited about then?
The metrics. He said they were testing 2 different opt-out buttons. One just said, no thanks, simple enough.
Right. The standard.
But the second one, the one he designed, said something along the lines of, no, I prefer to stay average.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And he started laughing, telling me, you wouldn't believe it. The guilt trip button, his words, it cut our bounce rate by over 30%.
30% just from that wording.
Exactly. He was genuinely pleased, like he'd cracked some really clever code. But what struck me was the language he used. He didn't talk about people at all.
What did he talk about?
It was all user funnels, cognitive friction, optimizing for conversion. And listening to him, I mean, he's a good guy, fundamentally, not some sort of con artist.
Right.
But he was describing with this, detached professional pride, a system designed purely to make thousands of people feel this tiny engineered flicker of inadequacy.
Just to optimize a funnel.
Just to optimize a funnel, and that quiet click, that almost invisible moment, it felt like a perfect symbol for this new kind of power, one that doesn't even need to raise its voice.
Yeah, that's potent.
Okay, so let's unpack that. That whole anecdote, that invisible click, the engineered guilt, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Right.
Our mission here is really to explore how AI and advanced user experience design, UX design, are intentionally influencing the decisions we make every single day.
And that's a huge range of decisions, isn't it? Transactional, social.
Even political, yeah. These systems are basically exploiting our psychological vulnerabilities, often just for commercial gain. We need to understand the architecture of this silent power structure.
It's crucial.
And we've pulled together a range of material that really tackles this head on. It's not just about pointing out the manipulation, but also exploring the pretty sophisticated countermeasures being developed and deployed right now, globally.
And what's really interesting, I think, is that we're looking at this problem from, 3 distinct but totally interdependent angles. You have to see them together.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, you've got the practice itself, right? The unethical design tactics, we often call them dark patterns. That's ground zero.
Got it.
Second, you need to look at the big picture, the institutional efforts required to actually manage these risks. That's where AI governance and things like risk management frameworks come in, big organizations trying to get a handle on it.
Okay, the systemic response.
Exactly. And third, we have to turn outwards towards the necessary skills for society as a whole, the individual defense mechanism, you could say, and that's critical media literacy. How do we resist?
Design, governance, literacy. 3 pillars.
Precisely. And if you think about the complexity of the AI driving a lot of this manipulation, it helps you understand why standard controls just don't cut it anymore.
How so?
The risks associated with AI, they're all over the map. You've got potential long-term, high-probability systemic failures right alongside short-term, maybe low-probability localized screw-ups.
And the impact varies wildly too, I imagine.
Absolutely. The negative consequences could be tiny, almost negligible, or they could be huge, high-impact events affecting individuals, whole companies, even, entire socio-technical ecosystems. It's this huge range in complexity that makes AI so uniquely challenging to deploy responsibly.
So you need that multi-front defense strategy you mentioned.
You absolutely do. It's the only way to approach it comprehensively.
All right, let's start where the problem begins. The design choices themselves, these dark patterns. You mentioned the term. I know it was coined by Harry Brignall. He described it as tricks used in websites and apps that make you do things that you didn't mean to, like buying or signing up for something.
Yeah, that's the original framing. Pretty intuitive.
It sounds deliberately malicious, tricks. But what's the sort of professional definition? What's the actual harm being done here beyond just annoyance?
Well, the core harm isn't just accidental confusion, though that can happen. It's the intentional subverting or impairing of the user's autonomy, their ability to make decisions, their choices.
So it's deliberately messing with their free will, essentially.
In a way, yes. The design is engineered really to exclusively serve the company's commercial interest. It often pushes the user to take an action that actually contradicts what they might rationally want or what's in their own long-term best interest.
Okay, and this is where AI comes in and just pours gasoline on the fire, right? We're moving beyond simple, clumsy manipulation into something people are calling hyper-nudging.
Exactly. It's not just about, putting a button in a slightly awkward place anymore. That's old school.
So what makes it hyper?
It's the convergence. Digitalization created this perfect storm, really.
Huh.
You have very rigorous behavioral experimentation happening constantly. Things like user-centered design, A/B testing, running on massive scales.
Testing tiny variations to see what works best.
Right. And that's running alongside continuous massive data collection. This lets companies build incredibly precise, detailed consumer profiles.
Profiles that know more about me than I know about myself sometimes.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Because these profiles don't just track what you did. They're getting sophisticated enough to anticipate your future behavior, predict your likely psychological state, even pinpoint your exact emotional pressure points in real time.
Wow. So instead of a designer making an educated guess about what might trick, say, the average person,
The AI analyzes millions, billions of data points, and instantly applies the tactic that is mathematically calculated to be most likely to succeed against you, specifically right now in this context.
that's terrifying. Personalized manipulation at scale.
That's the concept of architectural asymmetry in action. The platform knows you and controls the environment. And the scale, that's the other killer aspect. We're talking about potentially billions of interactions daily across the digital economy.
Right.
So even a tiny, seemingly insignificant increase in the conversion rate, maybe just a fraction of a percent, if it's achieved through these manipulative
It
techniques.
translates into enormous amounts of money for the companies.
Billions, potentially. That's the powerful incentive structure we're up against. It makes resisting these practices internally very difficult for companies focused purely on the bottom line.
Let's make this concrete. Can we look at a couple of specific, maybe more recent examples of how this behavioral exploitation is playing out? Say, right now in 2025. First, maybe social media. The idea of AI-generated social media feeds designed as content loops.
Yes, this is a really interesting and concerning evolution of the basic newsfeed algorithm. These content loops are, well, the argument is they're intentionally engineered
Engineered how?
to exploit the brain's reward circuitry, basically. Dopamine hits, designed to keep users locked in a perpetual cycle of consumption. Scroll, get a small reward, scroll again.
Endlessly.
The algorithm's primary goal becomes maximizing attention capture and engagement duration. That's the metric that matters. And it often prioritizes that above everything else, potentially including the user's mental well-being or, their need to actually get off the platform.
So it's weaponizing psychology, things like variable rewards, social validation cues.
Exactly. All those little psychological hooks to keep you glued to the screen. And the ethical critique here is that this isn't just an accident of optimization. It's arguably a deliberate design choice, prioritizing financial metrics over, say, human flourishing.
Okay, so that's attention economics. What about actual transactions? We're seeing similar exploitation with AI and dynamic pricing in e-commerce, right?
Absolutely. Traditional dynamic pricing, it responds mostly to supply and demand, maybe time of day. Pretty straightforward.
Right, like surge pricing for ride shares.
Yeah. But AI-driven dynamic pricing can incorporate behavioral exploitation. Research has shown instances where e-commerce platforms use AI to detect very specific user behaviors in real time.
Like what kind of behaviors?
Things like browsing really quickly, maybe visiting the same product page multiple times, or patterns that correlate strongly with high emotional arousal.
Yeah.
Maybe you're stressed, maybe you're excited.
And the AI picks up on this.
It predicts that you, the user, are likely in a state where you'll make an impulsive or emotional purchase, almost regardless of the cost. And then it artificially increases the price just for you, just in that moment.
Whoa, so it's literally trying to monetize my emotional vulnerability.
That's the argument. It's a direct psychological manipulation for profit, exploiting a temporary state for commercial gain.
Okay, let's try and categorize some of these dark patterns. The sources often group them. We can start with the simple stuff, like just making one decision easier or more visually prominent than the others.
Right, that's the classic sort of nudge, but used unethically, steering you towards the preferred option by making it the path of least resistance.
Then you get tactics playing on urgency and scarcity. That whole fear of missing out, FOMO.
Definitely, creating that false feeling of urgency. You see it all the time. Only 2 items left at this price, or limited time offer, or 37 people are viewing this hotel room right now.
Even if it's not strictly true, sometimes.
Sometimes it might be automated or exaggerated. The goal is to rush the user, prevent them from engaging in, rational thought, price comparison, or just stepping away to think about it. It leverages scarcity bias.
And this brings us back to my friend's story. Confirm shaming. This feels particularly nasty because it's playing on social dynamics.
It is arguably one of the more insidious types, yeah, because it weaponizes language and emotion, particularly guilt or social anxiety, to shame users away from the choice they might actually prefer and towards the one the company wants.
Like the, no, I prefer to stay average button. Textbook case.
Absolutely. It preys on that very human desire not to be seen as, well, average or suboptimal. It makes opting out feel like a personal failing.
Beyond shaming, there are patterns designed just to obstruct or confuse people.
Right. Things like deliberately confusing language, maybe using double negatives in questions, or intentionally inducing what's called click fatigue.
Click fatigue?
Yeah, making users go through an excessive number of steps, an unreasonable number of clicks to achieve something simple they want to do, like changing privacy settings, or a really common one, try to cancel a subscription.
The endless cancellation maze.
Exactly. The complexity itself becomes the weapon. It's designed to make you just give up.
And finally, there's just outright blinding consumers, hiding things.
Yeah, actions like sneaking extra items, sometimes mandatory add-ons, into your shopping basket right at the last stage of checkout, hoping you won't notice.
The cost traps.
Right, where the initial payment seems like a clear one-off purchase, but buried deep in the terms and conditions are subsequent, necessary recurring payments that were totally obscured up front. It's all about undermining informed consent, really, across this whole spectrum. Okay, so given that this kind of manipulation isn't just isolated incidents, but it's being engineered into the very architecture of global digital markets, well, the solution can't just be individual awareness, right? It can't just be reactive.
It needs to be bigger, more systemic.
It has to be institutional and systemic. And that's precisely why resources like the AI Risk Management Framework 1.0 or the AI RMF are so incredibly important. This was developed by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the U.S.
NIST. Okay, I've heard of them. What's the core idea behind this RMF?
So the AI RMF is designed to be a voluntary framework. That's important. It's rights-preserving, non-sector specific, so it can apply anywhere. And its goal is basically to help organizations manage the risks associated with AI systems and promote trustworthiness throughout their lifecycle.
Trustworthiness. That sounds good, but what does it mean in practice?
The foundational principle driving it is responsible AI, which really emphasizes human centricity, social responsibility, and sustainability. It's about considering the impact from the very beginning, from conception all the way through to when the AI system is eventually retired.
Okay, but you said it's voluntary. If it's voluntary, isn't that just, well, window dressing? Why would a company, or my friend the designer, prioritize these potentially costly principles if their profits, maybe even their job security, depend on designing that effective guilt trip button?
That's a really critical tension. You've hit the nail on the head. The RMF definitely relies on a combination of, let's say, institutional foresight within the company, but also external pressures, market pressure, potential future regulation, litigation risk, and the risk of catastrophic reputation damage if an AI system goes wrong publicly.
So it's a proactive defense mechanism for the company, in a way. Manage the risk now or pay later.
That's a big part of the sell. The RMF provides that structured, proactive defense. And it does this by laying out 7 key characteristics of trustworthy AI. These are the ideals against which any system should be rigorously measured throughout its life.
And the idea is that neglecting these characteristics directly increases the chances of those big negative consequences happening.
That's the direct correlation, yes. Failure to address these dimensions is where the significant risks lie.
Okay, let's break down those 7 characteristics. They seem pretty central. What's the absolute foundation?
The first one is really foundational. The AI system must be valid and reliable. This goes beyond just does it work. It means the system needs to show high accuracy, yes, but also robustness. And critically, it must generalize effectively beyond the specific data it was trained on.
So it needs to work in the real world, not just in the lab with the training data.
Exactly. If it only works reliably for the demographics perfectly represented in its initial data set, it's not truly reliable. And it certainly can't be considered trustworthy. This is really the necessary precondition for all the other characteristics.
Makes sense. What's next? Something probably obvious but hard? Safe?
Safe. Obvious concept, incredibly complex execution with AI. Safety means the system must rigorously avoid outcomes that could endanger human life, health, property, or the environment. Pretty high stakes.
Definitely. How do you ensure that?
Well, it demands really rigorous, continuous testing across a huge range of diverse scenarios. And maybe most importantly, especially for complex adaptive systems, is the ability for the system to degrade safely.
Degrade safely, meaning?
If the system starts to fail, or if it encounters conditions outside its designed operating parameters, there has to be a defined, predictable process for it to shut down safely, or maybe revert to a known harmless state, rather than just failing unpredictably and potentially catastrophically.
Okay. After safety, we need defense. You mentioned secure and resilient. They sound similar, but how do they differ in the AI context?
Good question. They're related but distinct. Security is primarily about preventing unauthorized access or malicious interference from outside. Think about adversarial attacks, where someone crafts specific inputs designed to fool the AI model. Or data poisoning, where the training data itself is corrupted.
Protecting it from bad actors.
Right. Resilience, on the other hand, is more about the system's ability to withstand unexpected adverse events, which could be internal or external. Things like power surges, network outages, or sudden drastic changes in the environment it's operating in. And after withstanding it, resilience means it can safely and promptly return to its normal intended function.
Got it. Secure is defense against attack. Resilient is robustness against disruption. What's next?
Next up is accountable and transparent. This pair is crucial, especially when you, as a user, are dealing with a decision made by an algorithm that affects you.
Yeah, the black box problem. What does transparency actually look like here?
Transparency means that information about how the system was designed, what data sources it uses, and crucially, why it produced a specific output or decision, must be available and ideally understandable.
Okay, information is available. What about accountability?
Accountability goes a layer deeper. It requires clearly defining the roles and responsibilities of all the humans involved, the developers, the deployers, the operators, the users. And critically, there must be a defined, accessible structure for redress, a way to appeal or get correction when the system produces a harmful or simply incorrect outcome.
So transparency without accountability is just looking at the specs.
Pretty much. Accountability demands that someone is responsible and there's a mechanism to fix things or provide recourse.
Makes sense. You also mentioned explainable and interpretable. How do these fit in? They sound like transparency again.
They're closely related, but technically distinct, and super important for managing the risks that come from AI systems being inherently inscrutable, especially complex ones. Explainability is more about how the system works internally, the technical mechanisms, the algorithms, the processes it uses.
The how.
Right. Interpretability is more about why a specific decision was made in a particular context for a particular individual. It's about providing a human understandable meaning or justification for a specific output. Why did I get denied the loan? Why was this content shown to me?
And getting good explanations for complex models is hard, I hear.
It's a massive ongoing research challenge, especially for the huge pre-trained models that underpin a lot of modern AI. Achieving high interpretability without significantly sacrificing performance or accuracy is often a difficult trade-off.
Okay, I can see the tension there immediately. You might have a super accurate but completely opaque black box system, or maybe a very transparent system that's just less good at its job.
That is a profound and constant challenge in practical AI deployment. Organizations face these trade-offs all the time. For instance, optimizing for interpretability might lower accuracy, or another key tension is between creating privacy-enhanced systems and maintaining data utility.
How does privacy fit into trustworthiness?
Well, being privacy-enhanced is the sixth characteristic. It's about safeguarding human autonomy and individual dignity, often by using specific techniques known as privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs.
PETs, like what?
Things like differential privacy, which adds statistical noise to data to protect individuals, or federated learning, where the model is trained on decentralized data without the raw data leaving the user's device, or homomorphic encryption. These PETs are crucial tools, but using them can sometimes impact the accuracy or the utility of the data for the AI model, another trade-off to manage.
Okay, that leaves one more characteristic.
The final one, and arguably one of the most complex and socially charged: fair with harmful bias managed. This is about addressing issues of equality and equity in AI outcomes, and crucially recognizing that bias isn't just one simple thing, it's multifaceted.
How does NIST break down bias?
They classify it into three core categories, which is quite helpful. First, there's systemic bias. This is bias embedded in the very structures of society, our institutions, historical practices, cultural norms, which then gets reflected in the data we collect.
So the AI inherits society's existing biases.
Often, yes. Second, there's computational and statistical bias. This arises from the technical choices made, maybe using unrepresentative data samples for training, or bias is inherent in the model architecture itself.
Technical choices leading to skewed results.
Exactly. And third, there's human cognitive bias. This is about how the humans interacting with the AI perceive, interpret, and use the information it provides. Our own biases can lead us to misuse or misinterpret AI outputs, potentially amplifying existing societal biases even further.
Wow. Okay, so managing fairness is about tackling bias on all those fronts, societal, technical, and human. It's clear that trustworthiness isn't a simple checkbox, is it? It's a constant balancing act.
It's absolutely a dynamic balance, requiring continuous effort and management of these inherent tensions and trade-offs.
So how does the RMF help organizations actually do this management? You mentioned core functions.
Right. The practical side of the RMF is structured around 4 core functions: govern, map, measure, and manage. Think of them as phases in a continuous cycle.
Okay, let's start with govern. Sounds foundational.
It is. Govern is all about cultivating the right culture and structure. It means fostering a proactive, ethical culture of risk management across the entire organization, not just in one department.
Top-down commitment.
Absolutely. It involves setting clear, high-level policies and procedures for AI development and deployment. It requires defining clear accountability mechanisms, who is responsible for what. It emphasizes ensuring workforce diversity on AI teams, which is crucial for spotting potential biases. And it involves systematically integrating relevant legal and regulatory requirements right from the start. It's the cross-cutting function that shapes how the company approaches everything else.
Okay, culture and structure set. What's MAP?
MAP is about establishing the context for each specific AI system. Before you build or deploy anything, you need to thoroughly document its intended purposes. What is it supposed to do? Then, crucially, identify and try to estimate the potential harms, not just technical failures, but potential societal harms, fairness issues, safety risks.
Thinking about unintended consequences up front.
Exactly. And part of MAP is also clearly defining the organization's risk tolerance for that specific allocation. How much risk is acceptable? This whole MAP phase requires broad input, not just from developers, but from legal, ethics, domain experts, and importantly, potentially impacted communities or end users.
Getting diverse perspectives early makes sense. Then measure.
Measure is focused on assessment and ongoing monitoring. Once you've mapped the context and risks, you need ways to track them. Organizations need to employ rigorous tools, quantitative metrics, qualitative assessments, maybe mixed methods to continuously analyze and assess the identified risks.
Using metrics tied to those 7 trustworthy characteristics.
Precisely. You need metrics for validity, safety, fairness, explainability, etc. And a critical part of measure is ensuring independent review wherever possible to mitigate internal biases in the assessment. It also includes actively tracking emergent risks, new problems that might only appear after the system is deployed in the real world.
Continuous vigilance. Okay, last step, manage.
Manage is the action phase. This is where the insights from map and measure turn into concrete actions. It means prioritizing the identified risks, which ones are most critical to address. It involves allocating resources strategically to mitigate those risks. Planning specific response strategies for when things do go wrong, incident response plans,
Having a plan B.
and plan C, and implementing clear procedures to ensure that processes are actually followed to override, supersede, or even deactivate systems entirely if they prove to be unsafe, ineffective, or inconsistent with their governed intended use. For instance, under manage, you'd need comprehensive incident response and recovery plans if a major failure occurs.
It's a very comprehensive cycle. Govern, map, measure, manage.
It has to be, given the stakes.
And the need for such a detailed framework really underscores how different AI risks feel compared to, say, traditional software bugs, doesn't it? It's not just about code errors anymore.
Not at all. We're dealing with this profound dependency on data quality, which is often noisy, biased, and constantly changing. We're dealing with the potential for systemic hidden biases baked deep into models. We're dealing with the sheer complexity of models whose internal decision-making processes can be too vast for any human to fully comprehend.
And predicting failures is harder.
Especially for these huge, pre-trained foundation models. Predicting all their potential failure modes in novel situations is incredibly difficult. So you have this environment of increased opacity, increased uncertainty, and potentially increased impact. That's the context for why something like the RMF is becoming so essential. Now, while the NIST RMF is a really crucial tool for guiding organizations internally, you rightly pointed out that it is voluntary.
Right, which means enforcement can be patchy.
Exactly. So to ensure there are mandatory baseline standards across the board and to truly protect consumers from these kinds of systemically manipulative designs, you need external regulation, law with teeth.
And Europe seems to be quite active on this front.
Very active. In the European Union, they're tackling dark patterns quite aggressively, primarily by adapting and strengthening existing consumer protection laws. Specifically, things like the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, or UCPD, the Consumer Rights Directive, CRD, and the Unfair Contract Terms Directive, UCTD.
They're fitting this new problem into existing legal frameworks.
They are, but also proposing updates. And this whole regulatory push really hinges on a very powerful legal concept that's gaining traction: digital asymmetry.
Digital asymmetry. Okay, what exactly is that imbalance? Why is it so central to the legal argument against dark patterns?
So digital asymmetry describes the fundamental structural imbalance of power that exists between a trader, like an online platform or retailer, and an individual consumer in the digital environment.
An imbalance of power. How?
It operates on two main levels. First, there's informational asymmetry. The trader, the company, has access to incredibly detailed, constantly updated personal profiles on consumers. Their past behavior, their inferred preferences, their likely biases, maybe even their real-time emotional state or pressure points. Information the consumer themselves is often completely unaware the trader possesses or is using.
They know you better than you know yourself, again.
Potentially, in that specific context. And the second lever is architectural asymmetry. The trader completely controls and shapes the entire online environment. They design the interface, they set the defaults, they determine what's visible and what's hidden, they control the friction and the ease of navigation. The user is navigating a space entirely constructed by the party they're interacting with.
Wow. So information power plus environmental control.
Exactly. And the argument is that this combination is so potent, it makes all digital consumers potentially vulnerable, at least some of the time. It doesn't matter how educated or financially savvy you are. This system can be tailored to find and exploit a vulnerability specific to you, perhaps in a moment of distraction or stress.
And that blows up the old legal idea of the average consumer standard.
It seriously challenges it, because if the environment can dynamically adapt to make anyone vulnerable, then the benchmark of a hypothetical, reasonably circumspect average consumer might not be sufficient protection anymore. The digital environment can, in theory, nudge even the most rational consumer towards irrational behavior if it targets the right bias at the right moment.
So the system is basically designed to find and exploit the weakest point in anyone, meaning the average is constantly being undermined.
That's the core of the argument. Now, regarding enforcement, the good news is that existing laws, like the EU's Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, UCPD, can often already apply to these dark patterns.
How does the UCPD frame it?
It can apply if the practices constitute misleading actions, misleading omissions, or potentially fall into the category of aggressive practices.
Okay, examples. Misleading actions.
That could cover things like visually hiding important information, maybe using pre-checked boxes for consent, using confusing trick questions to get you to agree to something, or deploying interface settings where the harmful default is presented as the normal or recommended option.
And misleading omissions.
That's about leaving out crucial information that the average consumer needs to make an informed decision, which causes them to take a transactional decision they wouldn't have otherwise taken. Hiding subscription costs, for example.
And does the company have to have intended to mislead?
Critically, no. Legal guidance and case law in the EU have confirmed that the trader does not need to have malicious intent for deploying a dark pattern for that practice to be deemed unfair under the UCPD. The effect on the consumer is key.
That's a huge point for enforcement and litigation, surely. If a company runs an A/B test, finds an interface that boosts profits by exploiting a known bias, and implements it, they're potentially liable even if they claim they didn't intend to be unfair.
Absolutely. Ignorance or negligence isn't necessarily a defense if the practice itself is found to be objectively misleading or aggressive in its effect.
What about those aggressive practices under the UCPD? How do they capture dark patterns?
Aggressive practices can specifically cover scenarios where the trader unduly influences the consumer's choice through harassment, coercion, or, importantly here, by exploiting known consumer decision-making biases or vulnerabilities, or by creating unreasonable, non-contractual barriers like making it incredibly difficult to switch providers or terminate a contract.
The cancellation issue again?
Exactly. We've seen significant regulatory focus and legal action around obstacles to contract termination. A very prominent example was the series of complaints against Amazon across Europe, alleging that the process for canceling a Prime subscription was made deliberately and significantly more complicated than the process for signing up in the first place.
Creating that click fatigue you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. That intentional, multi-step, confusing design barrier was argued to constitute an unfair, aggressive practice designed to make people give up trying to cancel, inducing an unfair outcome through engineered friction.
Okay, so existing laws can be used, but you mentioned the EU is also looking ahead, proposing legislative reforms, because enforcement is often playing catch-up.
Yes, exactly. There's a recognition that just chasing bad actors after the fact isn't enough. They're pushing for reforms that mandate better design up front. Proactive measures. Like a major proposal gaining momentum is the establishment of a general principle of fairness by design within consumer law. This explicitly mirrors the well-established data protection by design and by default principle found in the GDPR.
So build fairness in from the start, just like privacy.
That's the idea. This principle would legally require that interfaces and user journeys must be designed fairly from the outset. It moves the legal focus beyond just having a list of specific prohibited dark patterns towards a more holistic requirement for ethical architecture.
That sounds quite fundamental. Are there also plans to ban specific patterns?
Yes. Further legislative proposals aim to add specific, commonly harmful dark patterns to the blacklist in the annex of the UCPD, meaning they'd be banned outright in all circumstances. One very significant proposal is to specifically ban confirm shaming.
My friend's stay average button would be illegal.
Under that proposal, yes. That practice of using guilt, shame, or other manipulative emotional language to steer users away from exercising a choice, like refusing consent or canceling a service, would be explicitly forbidden.
What about fixing the cancellation problem directly?
There's a major proposal for that, too, within the Consumer Rights Directive, CRD. It's the introduction of a mandatory contract cancellation button, or a similarly easy mechanism.
A one-click cancel.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The mandate is simple and powerful. The process for terminating a contract online must be made structurally and functionally as easy as the process was for initially concluding the contract. No more mazes, symmetric ease of entry and exit.
That would be huge for consumers. Anything else?
One more crucial element designed to prevent companies from finding clever workarounds. There's a strong push to introduce an anti-circumvention clause across both the UCPD and the CRD.
Anti-circumvention sounds like trying to future-proof the law.
That's exactly the goal. This clause would explicitly prohibit traders from using any contractual tricks, technical designs, or behavioral nudges, including sophisticated new dark patterns, specifically to undermine or bypass their legal obligations under consumer law. It aims to ensure that these mandatory design principles, like fairness by design or easy cancellation, can't just be defeated by the next wave of architectural ingenuity from designers trying to optimize their funnels.
Okay, so we've covered the institutional shield, like the NIST RMF trying to get organizations to build responsibly from the inside. And we've covered the regulatory squeeze, like the EU setting legal boundaries from the outside. But what about us? What happens at the individual level? How do we, as users, build up our own internal resilience against these systems that are, frankly, designed to exploit us?
That's the vital third piece of the puzzle. We have to shift from being, passive targets of these clicks and nudges towards becoming active, critical navigators of the digital world. And this is exactly where the concept and practice of critical media literacy, or CML, becomes absolutely essential.
Critical media literacy. It sounds more involved than just media literacy. What's the critical part?
It is more involved. CML is generally defined as an inquiry-based process. It's not just about consuming media, it's about analyzing and also creating media. And the critical part comes from its core purpose, to interrogate the fundamental, often hidden relationships between power and knowledge as they manifest in media.
Power and knowledge. Okay.
So it expands the traditional idea of literacy, which was often focused just on print texts, very verbocentric to include all forms of communication, images, sounds, advertising, the design of social media platforms, algorithms, popular cultural texts like memes or video games. Everything is potentially a text to be analyzed critically.
And the goal isn't just spotting, say, fake news or a phishing email.
That's part of basic media literacy, which is important. But CML aims higher. It's more transformative. It explicitly questions how identities, things like class, gender, race, sexuality are represented or misrepresented or constructed within media messages. And it challenges media messages that seem to reproduce oppression, discrimination, or inequality.
So the core belief is that media is never neutral.
Exactly, that's central. Media is always created within a specific social, economic, and political context, inevitably reflecting certain power structures and vested interests. CML teaches you to ask whose interests are being served by this message or this platform design.
And this kind of critical thinking is desperately needed now, you'd argue.
Desperately. We often operate under this, frankly, false and quite dangerous assumption that because young people especially grew up with smartphones and social media, they're somehow automatically digital natives who understand it all intuitively.
But they don't.
Well, many have technical access, sure, they know how to use the apps. But they often profoundly lack the critical skills needed to navigate these online spaces safely and effectively, let alone to their advantage. They might not recognize how their personal data is being constantly tracked and monetized by advertisers, or how algorithms feed them content designed to provoke outrage, or how biased conjecture gets presented as objective fact within their personalized feeds.
They're fluent users, but not necessarily critical analysts or strategic producers.
Precisely. They are often highly sophisticated consumers, but rarely critical analysts of the systems shaping their consumption, or effective producers who can use these tools for their own empowerment or social change.
So how does CML try to build these skills? Is there a framework?
Yes, the field has developed pedagogical frameworks. One common one outlines about 6 key interdependent components. These really sketch out the toolkit that educators, and by extension students and all of us, need.
Okay, what's the first component? Where does it start?
It starts with broadening the scope. The first component is often called multiliteracies and new technologies. This basically says that any effective pedagogy today must explicitly address all modes of communication, not just words, but visual design, sound, gestures, how space is organized on a screen. And it must engage directly with popular cultural texts, the TikToks, the YouTube algorithms, the design of video games, because that's where meaning is being made for many people.
Recognizing that literacy isn't just books anymore.
And that it's fragmented, constantly evolving with technology, requiring continuous adaptation.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second, and fundamentally important, is equity and access to technologies. CML proponents strongly argue that the digital divide isn't just about who has a laptop or smartphone. It's also, crucially, about who has meaningful access to quality education about media and technology.
Access to the critical skills, not just the hardware.
Exactly. Because unequal access to both the tools and the critical education needed to use them wisely just reinforces existing social inequalities and stratification. So, CML insists that equitable allocation of educational resources and opportunities around media literacy is a non-negotiable requirement for achieving any kind of digital social justice.
Okay. Scope broadened, access addressed. What's next?
The third component really gets to the heart of deconstructing manipulation, examining multiple viewpoints and representation from non-dominant groups. This means teachers have a responsibility to help students understand how media structures, including algorithms and platform designs, can subtly or overtly manipulate them.
How? By asking critical questions.
Yes, by teaching them to critique media and society through probing questions like whose voices are being centered in this story or platform, whose are being marginalized or silenced, whose interests are served or not served by the ideas being presented here. How is my own experience being shaped by the history and power relations embedded in this text or technology? It makes students conscious of how their reality is constructed.
Moving beyond just accepting the feed as reality. What's fourth?
Fourth is making it relevant. Student-centered inquiry. Effective literacy practice, CML argues, must emerge directly from the student's own material realities, their interests, their lived experiences. If students are worried about online bullying, algorithmic bias in college admissions, or deepfakes, then the pedagogy must address those specific concerns directly.
Letting the curriculum respond to their world.
Exactly. It allows knowledge and critical skills to surface organically from issues of identity, power, and relationships that actually matter to them. It turns reading, analyzing, and even creating media into substantive, goal-oriented actions relevant to navigating their own lives.
Okay. The fifth component sounds quite different. Testimony and healing. What's that about?
This is perhaps the most profound and maybe the most needed component, especially considering the harms we discussed earlier. It's the core social-emotional learning aspect of CML. It argues that educational spaces, like schools, must intentionally create safe opportunities for students to tell their own stories. to give testimony about their experiences online, the good, the bad, the confusing, the harmful.
Why is giving testimony so important?
Because the act of sharing lived experience, especially around difficult or traumatic online events like cyberbullying, shaming, or manipulation, is crucial for dismantling harmful narratives and enabling individual and collective healing. It helps rewrite damaging social scripts and trauma associated with digital life.
This makes me think of that powerful story about Cameron James, the high school student.
Yes, exactly. His personal tragedy, where a nude picture of him was circulated widely by classmates via text message, became a source of profound, lasting humiliation and regret. And the traditional school system, focused on standard curriculum, had no mechanism to help him address or process that very real digital abuse of power for years.
Until he wrote that poem.
Until he found his own way to give testimony through writing that raw, emotional poem. His story highlights the failure of an educational system stuck on traditional verbocentric literacy tasks to even acknowledge, let alone address, these kinds of profound digital harms where students suffer real violence, oppression, and deep emotional pain through social media and digital interactions. CML insists we must make space for that testimony, for that healing process.
Acknowledging the real emotional toll, that's powerful. What's the final component?
The sixth component closes the loop: production and transformation. CML emphasizes that students aren't just passive consumers or critics of media. They must also be empowered as skilled producers and distributors of media themselves.
Moving from analysis to action.
Precisely. They should be encouraged and taught how to use media tools, video, audio, web design, social media campaigns to actively create their own counter-narratives, to challenge dominant narratives, to advocate for their communities, to engage in tangible social action that promotes equity and social justice within the digital sphere and beyond. It turns critical analysis into meaningful, outward-facing, transformative action. #outro. So when you pull it all together, what this deep dive really shows, I think, is that this complex challenge posed by AI-driven manipulation, symbolized by that quiet, almost invisible click, your friend engineered it's being met, or at least confronted, on these three absolutely essential and converging fronts.
Right, let's recap them quickly.
First, you have that internal organizational push for responsibility. That's championed by frameworks like the NIST AI RMF, trying to mandate better processes inside companies around governance, mapping risks, measuring performance against trustworthiness, and managing AI responsibly throughout its life cycle.
The internal controls.
Second, there's the strong external pressure from legal and regulatory bodies, like we see happening in the EU. They're targeting that core issue of digital asymmetry by pushing for fundamental principles like fairness by design, by explicitly banning the worst practices like confirm shaming, and by enforcing practical measures like easy contract cancellation.
The external rules of the road.
Exactly.
And third, the strategy that involves all of us, the long game perhaps. Individual and collective empowerment through education. That means seriously investing in critical media literacy to ensure that individuals, starting from a young age, actually develop the cognitive tools, the critical frameworks needed to understand, analyze, and ultimately challenge the very architectures of power that seek to manipulate their choices online.
Right. The battle for our digital autonomy, for genuine choice, it's being fought or needs to be fought simultaneously at every single level of this complex socio-technical system, from the corporate boardroom to the legislative chamber to the classroom.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective. It's such a stark contrast, isn't it? To think about my friend, the designer, genuinely celebrating his improved metrics, taking that detached professional pride in successfully optimizing his subscription funnel, and then contrasting that with this massive, complex, multifaceted effort that's required globally, involving high-level policy bodies like NIST, regulators drafting detailed anti-circumvention clauses,
Right.
entire school districts needing to implement deep, critical pedagogy programs.
All just to push back.
All just to ensure that that quiet, seemingly insignificant, almost invisible click we make online every day remains something closer to a conscious, informed choice, rather than just a manipulated outcome engineered solely for commercial conversion. We're essentially fighting to make that click meaningful again.